Hello, happy New Week, happy Monday. I'm Yuval with Garrett Agility, and we're continuing the series about fixing your OKRs or boosting, accelerating how you're doing OKRs. And today I wanted to focus on OKR Kanban boards as a way to apply focus and flow to your OKRs. So very high level, this continues the topic of the dysfunction of working on too many OKRs at the same time, whether it's at the organizational level or the specific team or department. If you recall, in previous live streams, I talked about the fact that you have an OKR for everything. Everybody gets an OKR. Everything is an OKR. We talked about the fact that OKRs are like the chocolate balls in the OKR factory or the chocolate factory. There's just too many of them. Nobody's pacing them. And we talked about some techniques for what to do about that. Very high level. What we talked about is that not everything even needs to be an OKR. And it might be an interesting exercise to figure out what are your real OKRs, objectives that you're really focusing on disrupting the way you're working or disrupting your product or developing new ways of doing things or new products versus KPIs that you're just monitoring versus what you might consider work that you need to do. It might be developmental work, but it's business as usual work. It's not strategic. It's not an element of your strategy that you need to actually convert to execution. It's just part of running the day-to-day of your business. So let's maybe connect this thinking to what I'm presenting with OKRs and look at how I'm actually working with these OKR Kanban boards with organizations. Feel free to add comments along the way, and I'll try to answer during this session. So very high level, when I meet an organization, the typical thing we might do is, I'll ask them to basically say, okay, put all of your OKRs out there. Put all of your OKRs on the board or on a mural, whatever. And this is, by the way, part of that Fixing OKRs worksheet that I'll talk about in the next live stream next week. And this might actually, create multiple OKRs that we now need to analyze. The first thing we'll do is probably to understand what they mean and categorize them into things that are KPIs, things that are business as usual work. Even though they might be called OKRs right now, we might say, no, that's not a real OKR. And some of these would be actual OKRs. And part of what might happen in that exercise is if in the beginning of the exercise everything was deemed an OKR, as part of the exercise, a lot of these items would probably shift to being KPIs or business as usual. Some of them would stay as OKRs. And of course, the numbers here, might look different if we're talking about a real world organization, but still there would be fewer OKRs than the big picture, which is good. It's the first act of focus. Whatever was there, we could take with us to a Kanban board. So what does that look like? So let's now focus on visualizing how these OKRs flow. The key concept, very high level, is we want to get a picture of where each one of these OKRs is in its journey. If you think about the journey of an OKR, you might think of there's this funnel of things that could become OKRs. We're thinking about that strategy. We haven't, agreed that it's a strategy that makes sense. We're thinking about this initiative, about this intervention about this disruption. We're reviewing it, we're refining it, we're trying to come up with the actual objective, maybe talking about potential key results. We have conversations with the people that would need to be involved in actually doing this, and we decide what we are going to plan and commit to, what will have to stay in the backlog. Then eventually we have some sort of commitment that those are our real OKRs, and then we will probably start working on them. People will start working on these OKRs. They're in progress. There's a point at which we need to review where we are on these OKRs. There are 2 points, actually. One is on a cadence. So regardless of whether we achieve those OKRs or not, we want to check up on where we are. And when we think we've achieved those OKRs, we need to review and see that we've actually achieved the key results. Have we achieved the impact through these key results? Have some conversation, reflect on, do we want to do something more in this area, learn from it, and eventually the OKRs would be considered done. We've finished focusing on them. There might be new ones. They might become KPIs. They might become business as usual, but the OKR doesn't require any attention. This is a classic, what we might call development value stream, or flow of considering something, exploring the space, doing it, learning from it, deploying the learnings from these OKRs. And Kanban is a great tool to actually manage the flow of multiple things in the organization that are flowing through this process at the same time. So what we might do is, first of all, map that very generic Kanban board that I just explained to the reality of the organization. We could actually start with that very high-level template that I described, maybe add something like the traffic light that we see here that basically helps us reinforce the fact that we want to manage the risk around an OKR and have transparency to, are we actually getting the outcomes that we're looking for with these OKRs? But it might be okay to just start with this workflow, or you might want to adjust it for your needs if there's a language that really resonates for the organization, or other phases that make sense for you. I don't know, budgeting the work that is related to an OKR, if that's something that you do. The next step would actually be to map the OKRs that we identified into where are they currently in this journey. So let's say I joined the company February 1st, and we're trying to see how to improve how they're doing OKRs. There are some OKRs that will probably be somewhere in progress. Some OKRs that have been committed, but they're telling me, we have this OKR, but there's no real work related to that right now. So we might say, okay, that's there. They might say there are a couple of things that are in different stages of ideas and readiness. And they might say there are some OKRs that, are going well. And at this point, I might actually ask some questions around, how do we know? Are we getting traction on the key results already? Is our assumption that something is by default green when it started, or is our assumption that it's by default red when it started? Part of the watermelon approach to project management or traction or evidence-based management is to assume red by default. So when we used this Kanban board at the biotech startup last year, this was one very useful technique, that by just saying by default it's in the red and you need to earn your transition to the yellow to the green through things like a definition like what you see down here. For example, we are seeing evidence towards outcomes. It's not clear yet whether the OKR will be achieved, but we're seeing some progress towards outcomes. Not about output, not we've done work there, not we've invested money there, not we've invested time here, not we've developed 100 stories for this. No, I don't care about any of that. Are we seeing progress in terms of the key results for these OKRs? Not necessarily we've achieved them, but we're seeing some progress. That's where I typically move from the red, which is we've started work. It's not on the shelf. We've started work, but we're not seeing key results yet. It's setup work, foundational, whatever, but we're not really seeing the fruits of that work yet. Green would be if we really have evidence that this is on track to accomplishing our objective. And one of the interesting conversations to have on an ongoing basis when you're checking up on your OKRs is are things where they should be? Do we have the evidence? And if they are where they should be, what does it tell us? What does it tell us? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at the beginning of the quarter that everything is in the red. I would actually maybe even prefer that some of the things would stay as committed at the beginning of the quarter, because we might not have the energy, the capacity to actually focus on all of them. But all of the things that we've started, yeah, they might be in the red initially. But how soon do we want to see that things are starting to move into the yellow? If we have, for example, an OKR, let's say mark this one, that has been in the red for a while after it started, let's say a month or two even after it started, that's interesting, right? That's maybe even worrying. Did we expect that? Did we expect the value to the evidence to occur so slowly on that item? So essentially what we're saying is, let me maybe go to EBM. I want to find the EBM slide here and connect to another concept. Yeah, over here. So essentially, for each OKR, if you use the evidence-based language, what we would expect is that over time, we would see evidence that we're heading towards achieving our goal there. Whether we're talking about an intermediate goal or a really strategic goal, we would see evidence as we go. It's okay at the beginning not to see too much evidence and to start with the red. It's okay at the beginning to basically say, let me mark this up as we go, to say at the beginning, I'm okay to be in the red. I haven't spent too much time, so I'm not expecting to see that much evidence. Fine. I'm fine with that. But then as time proceeds, I'm expecting to start to see some evidence. I'm expecting to start to see some more evidence that some things are happening. And as more and more time passes, especially if we have a time box of a quarter, I'm expecting to see even more evidence that this is happening. Let's get clearer here. So essentially what I'm saying is that what I expect out of an OKR could be reasonable or less reasonable depending on its age, which is one of the flow metrics that Kanban supports. When we look at the Kanban metrics, flow metrics, as we define them in the professional Scrum with Kanban World, in the Kanban guide for Scrum teams, and the Kanban guide, work item aging, or WIA, is one of these interesting metrics. And that metric would basically point to the fact that this is an issue, right? This metric would tell us, wait, there's something worth paying attention to with this OKR. And as we go, we should find what's the right cadence to actually manage this board, manage how OKRs are moving in between these stages. Meanwhile, there might be already conversations around what should be our next couple of OKRs. Even if we're working, and we probably will be working using some sort of quarterly cadence, we don't want to be in a situation where at the end of the quarter, this is basically empty. Because what would happen if this is empty last week before the end of the quarter? It will be a rush to get to OKRs for the next quarter. And what happens when we're rushing? We're not thinking things through. They probably won't be strategic OKRs. There's more chance that this would be business as usual work that people are just marking as OKRs in order to have OKRs, and which could explain some of this dysfunction that we're talking about. So what we want is to instate this management of the flow of OKRs from ideas and from strategic conversations all the way to having some OKRs that are ready to be planned, ready to be committed. It doesn't mean they need to be perfect, but we have some sort of refined backlog of OKRs that we could actually pull into the quarter and maximize our investment and our focus. So the OKRs Kanban can actually help us manage this flow of upstream for OKRs, as well as what's actually going on with the active OKRs, with the committed OKRs for the quarter. I'll pause here for any comments or questions that are there. All right. So the big picture here, again, is you want to bring in your actual OKRs when you start to do this. If you're already doing this, just use your OKRs Kanban when you're working on your OKRs. Map to where these OKRs are right now using this board. Maybe even adjust the workflow on the board. Review both the stages as well as the policies that you see here. Start to think about work in process limits. How many OKRs does it make sense for us to have at each one of these levels? And that might be different if we're doing this at the company level, at the group level. Maybe you want to do this at the team level. My recommendation would be to start to do this at the company or portfolio level, whatever is the level that you're managing your OKRs. When you're scaling your OKRs, let's say you have a situation like we discussed in one of the previous live streams where you have some sort of network of OKRs, my recommendation is still do it on the same board. In that biotech startup that I discussed, we did everything on the same board. Part of the beauty of OKRs is the transparency that you get across the entire organization of what are the different OKRs from different people. OKRs, anyhow, are in many cases cross-functional, so they might cut across multiple groups. So it would both be hard to divide and conquer the OKRs themselves into multiple boards, and it would also affect the value that you're getting from this transparency. So again, one Kanban board is probably where you want to be with OKRs from across the organization, you will probably want to have some way of discerning the different OKRs on this board and who do they relate to. Whether it's through the color, maybe have different colors for different groups. Maybe you want to use some sort of swimming lanes along these lines, according to the different groups in the organization. No, that's not what I wanted to do there. Maybe you have one of these lanes for each group. If you have OKRs that map into specific groups or departments in the organization, and maybe you have also a lane that reflects work that is integrative, like OKRs that cut across multiple groups in the organization. You could also do that with colors. Think of a rainbow OKR that combines work from different areas in the organization. Obviously, these would require more attention or would deserve more attention when you're reviewing this. Now that you have this picture, start to discuss what this snapshot picture is telling you and start to manage this OKR on an ongoing basis. One other interesting exercise that you might want to try is when you create this initial picture, ask yourselves to fast forward, to say, okay, let's fast forward a month. How do we think that this board would look like? And another month, maybe even play through a quarter or two, and how do we think this will look like? And by doing that, by doing this future perspective, if you want to call it that, of how your flow would look like, you would probably see some things. People would probably anticipate, if it's anywhere similar to the results when I tried this with teams, people would actually anticipate the fact that things would stay stuck, let's say somewhere, or that things would accumulate, that there would be some new things that are interrupting, that the OKRs, even though we committed to them, are less relevant. All of reality will show up as concerns and risks that would affect this flow and show you that this is more of a swamp than a river, and that would be an opportunity to think about what would we do with that? How would we actually preempt this happening? That's a very nice exercise to do when you're getting going. Of course, once you start going, you will have reality to reflect on. Tal is asking for me to make the Kanban board bigger. Let me do this for a bit. So hopefully that's better. Also try to increase the font size here. No. That's not really what I wanted to do. Yes, mural tables aren't the best thing yet. Let me try again. Okay. Hope that's better. Any other questions or thoughts about this concept? Good to see you, Tal. It's been a while. By the way, I'll post, a full PDF of this to the thread as well, and I'll also share the bigger picture here, this whole worksheet, in the next live stream. At that point, I'll make this mural available as a template as well. So Shelly is asking, do you move whole OKRs across the board or KRs? That's a great question. We played around with this in that biotech startup. We played around with moving KRs. What we did was both. So in some cases, especially for very big OKRs with several OKRs, it made sense for us to actually have both the objective as well as the KRs on the board and to see things emerging. It, of course, adds some complexity because you need to somehow maintain the relationship between the KRs and OKRs. We did it in Trello and used some sort of Trello hierarchy plugin to help us with that. Nothing perfect, but it worked. Part of the beauty of doing this at the OKR level is that it's hopefully abstract enough, hopefully at the right altitude, that there aren't that many cards, even if you add the KRs. But it's definitely interesting to play with it. The risk that I see is if you do it at the KRs level and you didn't really limit the number of OKRs, you might have too many trees to see the forest. It might actually hurt your transparency to see all of the KRs. So your mileage may vary. Another approach, is to have the KRs on each one of these cards and track how you're doing with these KRs inside the card. So I've played with different techniques. I don't have a best practice yet. But you're thinking about it the right way, Shelley. Any other questions or thoughts? Is anybody doing this? Any lessons learned when you're doing this? So one more thing to pay attention to is that using these boards, and anytime you use Flow and Kanban, and maybe even at some point you should start to use flow metrics like work item aging and flow time for OKRs, and what's your flow load, and are you able to reduce the number of OKRs that you have in parallel at the same time. All of this is only focusing on the flow. It's not focusing on the value. It's helping you focus on the OKRs that you did decide to work on, and you should make sure to balance that with both the activity of making sure that these are actually OKRs and with looking at these OKRs and making sure that as many of them as possible are moving from being an activity-based OKR to something that's at least output-based and ideally more and more outcome-oriented. So that's another activity on these OKRs that you might want to focus on. I'm not saying don't start measuring the flow or managing the flow of OKRs until you've done this. Even if you have activity OKRs, it would probably help to start to use this Kanban board. One interesting thing that would happen is that once you start to ask these questions around, are we seeing evidence? Are we seeing whether this is tracking or not? It will be a time to reinforce this thinking of, is this an activity, an output, or are we actually seeing an outcome? So balance your conversations. Don't just focus on the flow, also talk about managing the flow of the right things and more outcome orientation. All right. I hope this was useful. We'll continue next week with an overview of this worksheet and the relationship between these different activities and how you might use this. I'm in the background working on getting this OKR, fixing your OKRs or boosting your OKRs worksheet to be ready for, for people to actually take and use to improve their OKRs. And this kind of duplicates the work that I'm doing hands-on with clients when we're working on their OKRs. Just making this something of a self-service that you can do if we're not working together. All right. See you next time. Have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.